week's podcast is sponsored by Brighter Vision. What's the point of having a beautiful website if it doesn't attract the clients you want to see? As the worldwide leaders of website design for therapists, Brighter Vision sees this issue happen way too often. A nice looking website doesn't equate to a successful website. The truth is, your current website might even be turning off potential clients. That's where Brighter Vision comes in. Brighter Vision's team of website designers will create a website that is centered around attracting and retaining your ideal client so that you can have a nice looking website as well as a successful one. Better yet, Brighter Vision is offering $100 off exclusively for listeners of the One Inside podcast. To take advantage of this offer, simply go to brightervision.com/inside. Again, that's brightervision.com/inside. You can find that link in the show notes. Welcome to the One Inside, an internal family systems podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Sollenberger. I'm excited that you and all of your parts have taken time to be with me and all of my parts. If you are a coach, a client, a therapist, if you are in business or education, and you're curious about the IFS model, you are in the right place. Now, let's see what happens on today's podcast. Hey everybody. Today's guest is Sacha Mardou. Sacha is an illustrator who makes IFS comics. That is correct. She draws comics of her IFS sessions, comics of unblending from her parts, and comics of self-to-part relationships. If you are new to IFS and are not sure what all this means, or what an IFS session looks like, or what parts work looks like, go to ifscomics.com or follow her on Instagram at Miss Mardou, MSMARDOU. She publishes a new comic every week. She's got lots of stuff on her backlog to check out. It is incredible. I cannot express enough what a gift she is and a gift her work is to our community. And I'm not the only one who thinks that. She has a comic where she has a phone call with Dick. It is kind of hilarious and really, really touching. We talk a little bit about it on this episode, but you can find that if you go to her website. So on this episode, just to give you a little bit about what's coming up, we talk about her history and how IFS Comics came to be. Then we talk about how IFS Comics really demystifies IFS. Around the 30-minute mark, we start talking about writing and creative discipline, how IFS has helped with parenting, which I really appreciate. About the 45-minute mark, we start talking about Brene Brown, art and vulnerability. We talk about art and process. After we get a tiny bit sidetracked by Halloween, because I recorded this around that time, we also talk about, which I think is, I decided not to edit that totally out. I edited some of it out, but I didn't edit the whole thing out because I thought what was cool about that is how sometimes parts of us don't let us be creative. And so I think with having like the structure of Halloween, that softens some of our parts. And so then we can be a little bit more creative. After the Halloween, if you can hang out past that, after the last 10 minutes, we talk about how parts work, how working through with our parts through IFS can help with writer's block and can help with creativity, as creativity is a C word, which is one of the qualities of self. She's lovely. I think this is a great one. Enjoy it. Go check out her comics. They are just incredible.
So nice to meet you.
It's so nice to meet you too.
And I was curious, am I the first I know you've had writers on your podcast before, but am I the first layperson to IFS you've had?
I think so, because I've had practitioners, so I think they were probably lay people, but then they started like doing coaching or something like that. So yeah, I think you are the first lay person.
Okay, well, no pressure there then.
Yeah, no pressure at all. I have no
All right.
expectations. You're the first layperson, but I also feel like I'm kind of fangirling a little bit because I feel like you're this. Yeah, I'm feeling some fangirl things happening inside of me. Like I'm jittery, excited. Like I have parts of me that are just like so excited to talk to you and see you.
Well, bless your heart for that. Thank you.
So, let's see. Well, let's start with this. Let's start with where you are. Let's see. I'm excited. I need to settle down a second. I'm too excited. Let's start with where you are in the world
Uh-huh.
and what you see when you look out your window.
Okay, well, I am at my drawing desk in St. Louis, and it's in the kind of living room, dining room. I've just got like a desk, which is my corner of the house. And if I turn to my left, I can see out in the street. It's actually a really quiet day because I want to be at my desk because it's the place I'm most comfortable. But sometimes you'll have people mowing the lawn or deliveries and stuff, so it can get noisy. But so far, it's quiet out there, and it's a beautiful fall day. It's a little crisp, it's a little
Yeah,
sunny. It's nice. It's really nice.
that is nice. Do you live in like a city? Like when you look out, do you see a city or is it more like a suburban?
No, it's like a residential street, but we are like in the city limits of St. Louis. So I feel like we have the best of both worlds. It feels kind of relaxed, a bit like we're in a suburb, but if I just go 2 blocks over, there's all kinds of like shops and businesses and
Oh, that's
libraries, and
great.
it's great. Yeah.
That's great. And you can walk there. It's so fun when you can walk
It's
somewhere.
super walkable, yeah, which for St. Louis, you wouldn't think. People think it's a car city, but I do okay being a Brit who doesn't drive. So
You don't drive at all.
I don't. I never learned because in England, you just don't need to, you use
Oh.
public transport, you walk. Yeah.
How long have you been in the United States?
It's getting on for 15 years. So this will be my 15th year next year. Yeah, 14 years.
What brought you here?
So I'm a cartoonist and I was making comics in England, and my husband is also a cartoonist. And back then I met him because I bought one of his books in the UK at a comic show. And I was writing reviews for websites, and I reviewed his book and sent him a review, and he emailed back, and we just struck up a friendship. We became pen pals, and then that kind of thing where you're emailing somebody like 10 times a day and you've got a huge crush on them. And then eventually we met in London and started this transatlantic back and forth. And I moved over here in 2005 and we got married in 2006. So yeah, comics found me my husband as well.
I love that.
Yeah.
So before you did the review, had you seen a picture of him and were you like, oh,
No,
he's
I
kind of
hadn't.
handsome? Okay.
Yeah, and he draws these kind of funny characters that look a bit like goblins with like scars on their faces. Just like he draws characters, let's say that. So in my mind, he looks like that.
Oh,
He looked like a little ruffian with with
little like
scars on
gob.
his face and a cigarette. And then when I saw a picture of him, it's like, oh, he's Starling. So so different. Yeah,
I love that.
yeah,
Yeah, thank God. Because otherwise, if you were like, I love this guy, but I can't look at him, so we're gonna have to
right.
spend a lot of time on
Yeah,
emails.
indeed.
And when did you start Well, I guess let's tell everybody a little bit about you, and then I want to talk about when you started drawing.
Sure. Well, I obviously, like most kids, I drew all the time when I was a kid, and then I kind of stopped, like a lot of kids do. But then in my teen years, I started discovering. In my late teens, I started discovering kind of like alternative comics and American comics, and I went to university for English literature, and so I studied all the classics and Chaucer and all that kind of stuff. But as I graduated, I knew I really wanted to write and I really wanted to do comics. And so I started drawing again and I started making my first comics after graduation. Didn't get very far, but kept going. It's my first attempts were so embarrassing because comics, even though they're very easy to read, they're actually quite difficult to master. You think it looks simple, but when you try and do it, it's like, no, this doesn't look right yet. So I've been doing it for 20 years basically. And so now
Wow.
yeah. But yeah, I just began drawing comics after graduation. Knew that I wanted to do it for some reason. I was just so drawn to it. And I just kept doing day jobs that left me enough energy to keep pursuing comics. So that was bookstores and libraries, and I've worked in libraries ever since, pretty much. I work in a library in St. Louis. That's my part-time day job, and draw comics the rest of the time and raise my kid. So
And how old is your kid?
she is 10 and
She's
fifth grade.
10.
Yeah, middle school next year. So
Oh, I'm
yeah.
sorry.
Thank you. How old is your son?
8.
8. Okay,
8. Yep,
so
he's in 3rd grade.
that's nice. That's a nice year.
It
Yeah.
is nice. I feel like this year's been a little bit rough at the beginning, but it's been smoother. And I think
Yeah.
behavior-wise, he's sort of chill, so I'm going to enjoy it, but I'm sure it's going to change
Yeah.
soon. But yeah, I think things are pretty chill. And usually I have a big reaction to like the first day of school because I'm like, oh, he's my only child, he's my baby, and
Right.
I'm losing him. But I was like, 3rd grade, it's not, it doesn't
You've
feel
got this down. Yeah.
significant. Yeah, yeah. I'm like, that's okay. So I've heard that before. If you're really creative, then you shouldn't have a job that's super like you shouldn't have a job that's super creative because then that taxes you. So like if you're a writer, you shouldn't work at like a publishing house because then you're not going
Right.
to have any space or energy to do your writing. I've
It,
heard that
it
before.
depends. Yeah. I mean, my husband is a graphic designer and illustrator for his job, but he draws such different things to what he does for his day job. He draws kind of like
Okay.
corporate infographics. And so but the thing is, he's really, really good at drawing because he draws like all day and then he comes home in the evening and, draws his own stuff, the little goblin guys,
The goblins with the things on their face.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes. And yeah, kind of crazy, not quite superheroes, but, that kind of urban superheroes maybe an attempt to describe what he draws. So it can go both ways. I mean, he finds it works for him to sort of have a graphic design job. For me, I've tried being an illustrator and it just frustrates me too much. So I have to kind of like draw my own stuff or not bother. So
So have you always drawn? So I've read your first 2 books. You have 2 books that are published.
thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I thank you for sending it to me. I sat in one sitting, just read the first one, just gobbled it up. I loved it. So tell everybody what they're called and what they're about.
hmm So I have a graphic novel. It's in 2 volumes, but it's completed in those 2 volumes, and it's called Sky and Stereo. It's a coming of age story. One reviewer described it as a trippy coming of age story, which I thought was quite good. So it's about a teenager whose mom has converted to Jehovah's Witnesses, and she has her first boyfriend, and they break up, and it's very heartbreaking for her. And she starts making bad decisions and really starts fraying at the edges. And through the course of the book, you kind of go inside her head a little bit. So as she ends up suffering from mental illness and spends a summer in a psychiatric hospital. And the way I wrote it and intended it was that you kind of join her on that journey and maybe don't realize how much she's slipping until she has the big crash. And so, yeah, volume 2 is about her journey inside the psychiatric hospital and how she, in some ways, it sounds cliches, but battled her own demons in order to sort of rejoin society kind of willingly. She has a
Yeah,
lot to overcome herself in, her own private battles that she has to deal with internally before she's ready to sort of take her medicine and be a good girl and,
right.
kind of
Yeah.
recover. So,
I
yeah.
I felt like when she met this friend, and I feel like they were in the hospital, and I feel like there was a huge shift when she met the girl, and
Mm-hmm.
then that girl like took her medicine and got her to come outside, and then
Right.
that girl got discharged, and I feel like there was this. I actually felt that idea of like you get inside her head, that's definitely where I was. Like I was almost like
Yeah.
this is too much for me because it was so trippy. But then as soon as she met that girl, I actually felt like, okay, we're gonna be okay. Like we're gonna be okay. I'm
Well,
gonna
thank
be
you.
okay.
Yeah. I'm glad you connected to that. It's actually my favorite bit of the book, and it was my favorite bit to write and draw.
Oh,
And the other girl that she meets is called Mickey, and it turns out her name is actually Lakshmi, and she was raised a Hare Krishna. And this was all kind of made up, but from somebody that I knew in real life who was raised a Hare Krishna kid. And so I kind of used that for my book. And it was this moment where Iris, the protagonist, realizes she's not alone. I mean, she feels like the only one in the world who's ever messed up like this, the only one who's taken acid and ended up in a psychiatric hospital, the only one who was raised a Jehovah's Witness and couldn't deal with it. And yet here's this other girl who was raised a Hare Krishna, who's also taken LSD and messed up, and feels like she's at rock bottom. But this other girl has such positive energy and actually gives Iris that sense of A, not being alone, so she gets that connection, and B, like there's a way out of this. You can kind of go back and have fun. You can meet boys and go back to college and do all these things. So yeah, thank you. It was
yeah.
a ray of sunshine in the book, and I really enjoyed writing and drawing that. Yeah.
Yeah, I felt that. I really did as I was reading it. I love reading and I've never read comics. And
Hmm.
I think on the back of the book it says something about like comics for girls. And I thought, yeah, because I think girls, like my son, he reads graphic novels and he,
Right.
is into that. But I thought as a girl, I don't know that I've ever read a comic, to be completely honest with you.
Well, and I think it's generational because when I was growing up, I'm maybe a little bit older than you, but I didn't feel like there was a lot published that was for me. There were a few romance comics, but they were kind of like very girly, and that wasn't quite me either.
Yeah.
And so it took a long time to find like the kind of work that I really enjoyed reading. And it's a question of like knowing it's out there. Like there was stuff being published in America that I didn't know about, and when
Right.
I found it, I'm like, oh, this is for me. This is what I want to do. So yeah, and comics publishing is, it's really taking off. There's a lot of young adult books now. My daughter reads graphic novels and comics for her age, like the Raina Telgemeier books, Smile, and she has a new one called Guts. She's the biggest thing in publishing right now, and she's doing stuff for middle school girls,
That's
and it's
awesome.
amazing. So I think things will be different in the future, but right now comics is still this like in transition, and people are realizing you can do comics about anything. I have a friend who's written a great book about cooking ramen and it's in comics. And so there really is a comic for everything.
Well, and that's interesting because I think that's generational. So in my
Yeah.
private practice, I see probably half the population I see are like teenagers or young 20s. And I think ramen is so trendy.
Right.
It's very trendy. They're all doing it. So, but you are like, you knew almost like this self energy that knew I want to do comics. And that was like this clear flow goal of like, that's what you wanted to do.
It really was, yeah. And I'm very grateful to it because, like I said, it has changed my life. It found me my husband and we have a child together. So,
So then how did you find IFS? And then how did you end up doing these amazing IFS comics?
okay. So, well, thank you. Um, So I moved over here. My husband and I had a child in 2009, and life was kind of amazing and perfect. And, I had so much gratitude for it. And when my daughter reached the age of about 6 or 7, um, a lot of what happened in my own childhood started to kind of come back to me. I didn't kind of realize this at the time. I was just getting so much anxiety that I ended up seeking acupuncture. I was getting like stress acne and I didn't know why. I had all these anxiety symptoms and I didn't know where it was coming from. And I eventually sort of made the connection. This has to do with, what's going on inside of me in my own childhood and seeing that mirrored in my daughter. There were a couple of triggering things that happened to my daughter. She was like bullied for a while. And I was like, oh, this is about me. This is kind of about what happened to me. So I found a therapist through my acupuncturist. And in the very first session, my therapist recommended IFS and he explained it a little bit. And all I could hear were exiles, managers, firefighters. And I just was completely turned off. And I was like, yeah, I don't like the sound of that at all. Thank you very much. And that was that. And I think we did it like a year and a half maybe of talk therapy. And it was very, very helpful, but it took me a long time to sort of organically find my way back to IFS. And it was through a friend of mine who he's one of these incredibly well-read people and he's got books on everything you can think of. And he just like handed me this. It was the Tom Holmes Parts Workbook. And I was like, oh, I know what this is. My therapist mentioned it to me. And I was like, no, thank you. And I read that Tom Holmes book and it just like a light went off. Like, I get this. Like, I really get this and I want to do it. So I went back to my therapist and told him about it. And he was quite happy to sort of start the IFS journey with me. And it was from the start. I think I'm a very visual person, obviously, with my illustration and drawing. I kind of see things in my head before I draw them. So for me, IFS was always a very visual experience, but I'd also been meditating as well. So, finding that felt sense in your body came very naturally as well. So yeah, it was just like, once I found it, it really kind of took off. And yeah, I haven't looked back since.
I have that Tom Holmes book and I have the cards. Do you have
Oh
the
yes,
cards, the parts
I
cards?
don't. And the reason I drew my own because
Oh,
I
right,
felt
obviously.
like, yeah.
Well, I was just, when you mentioned that, I thought, wow, that's perfect for you because the illustrations in that
Mhm.
book are fantastic
They're
and
great.
they're
Yeah.
so good.
I didn't
Yeah.
feel like they represented me or my parts, but it helped me, it helped me kind of understand, oh, this is, this is how you do that.
Yeah. Yeah, right. So it's sort of like, right, it didn't look like your parts, but it gave you an idea of like, oh, I could do that, or I could make
Right.
something like that that would look like my parts.
It made the concept just like open for me. Like, I get this. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you started working with your therapist, and then did you start drawing out your parts? Is that sort of what you started doing? Or how did that?
Yeah, I would always like take notes in our therapy sessions, and I'm kind of a autodidact, I think is the word. I'm very much a self like taught person, and I love reading. And I just read everything about IFS I could get my hands on. So I read Dick Schwartz's books, which I was really scared to read because they seemed like they'd be really intimidating and
Oh,
difficult,
yeah.
and they're not at all. They're so easy to read and well written. They were kind of a pleasure. Yeah, I just read everything I could find, and I got Dick Schwartz's audiobooks as well, the CD of Meditations for Self, and they're greater than the sum of our parts. And I kind of put them on my computer, so I always have them. And I started doing a lot of self work in between sessions, and I would often like take what I discover about myself and my parts to my therapist, like in sessions. But I would do this mining work, and then I'd go to therapy and do the unburdening. And I ended up working with a second therapist for a while. I wanted to work with a woman to deal with some, personal issues. And now I'm back with my original therapist. So it's been an interesting therapy journey, but so eye-opening and rewarding. And when after my therapy sessions, I would like sit on the train home and just like write on my notes. And I would draw as well, I can like scribble down what this looks like. And I started drawing it in my sketchbook just for myself. And when I would do sessions by myself at home with my CDs, and I would, get big sheets of paper out and wax crayons for some reason, because it really tapped into my inner child. She loves drawing with wax crayons.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I started drawing these things, and I felt like they had some life and interest to them, but I was really scared to share them online. Eventually I did. I shared a couple of things, and just the interest in them was like night and day, like people really started to respond and comment, and it felt like I had something there. And so it kind of I had to do a lot of parts work about the parts who didn't want to share this stuff, and
Yeah.
parts who felt a lot of shame and embarrassment, and they eventually softened. And I had like younger parts who even stepped in and said, no, we really do want to share this. And so yeah, I was working with my parts to get to the point where I'm actually really comfortable sharing this stuff now. Being vulnerable and being open doesn't freak me out like it used to. I feel like vulnerability has actually been a really important lesson to learn as an artist. I feel like true art, not true art, but I feel like true connection comes when you're willing to be vulnerable. And that's something that IFS and doing comics about IFS has taught me. And I'm really grateful to that.
Yeah. So when you were doing is Sky and Stereo, is there some, like people always ask this about writers, like, is there some part of you that's coming out in your main character?
No, that's really astute. So Sky and Stereo book 1 came out in 2015, and the second book, which finishes it, just came out in 2019. So there's a 4-year gap between the two, where I finished the second book, and there were printing delays, all these things. But when the first book came out, 2015, was actually when I got this really terrible anxiety, and that's what started me on the therapy path. So in a way, Sky and Stereo started all this.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like putting this part of me out into the world that I felt very vulnerable. I was scared about what my family might think. So much has changed, and it really is fiction. And for example, the character of Iris's mother, in some ways, it's very much like my own family. My mom is a Jehovah's Witness, but I made her a very different character with a different name. And that was part of the fiction process. Because she was different, I was free to sort of be like, what would happen if the stepfather was like that? And it suddenly becomes different, and it's not you anymore. It's its own story with its own energy. And also everything you edit out to make one story means it's not real life anymore. It's not autobiography.
Right.
So it really is a novel with, a definitive beginning, middle, and end, and a story arc that some things are similar to what really happened to me, but it has its own trajectory and its own energy. And Aris is not quite me. She just looks like me because I'm lazy, and everyone I draw ends up having my nose. you know?
Well, I mean, I think that does contribute to the idea that this is you because it does look like you.
Yeah. It wasn't meant to be my original sketches. And then I think it was just like shorthand. Like it's just like,
Oh, right.
I didn't have to keep looking at a picture of how I intended to look. It's like, I'll just draw her like that. There's other cartoonists actually who've done the same thing. They've made a character who looks just like them. And it's like, no, it's not me at all. And it's like, but it looks just like you, Phoebe Glockner. And it's like, no, it's not you.
So that was part of that when you first put that first book out. That was part
Yeah.
of like, oh my goodness, I'm putting my heart out there. I'm putting
Yeah.
something so open and vulnerable.
It was anxiety inducing for sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then you go to this whole other like intensity with putting out these comics that are like so raw and so real and so with your IFS comics
Mm-hmm.
where like I don't know about everyone else. I mean, obviously I can't speak for them, but I know that I see myself and my parts in what you're doing and I think it just draws me in because what you're doing with your comics is you're displaying the model beautifully where you're like,
Well, thank you.
here's a situation and then you walk through, here's a situation with my daughter and then, how does that tap into, there's your own protector there and then an exile and then you walk through it that just like with the books, my emotions are going there too, but I'm also resonating it with you because I have so many similar parts.
Right. Yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, when you get under the surface, um, we all have so much in common. We're all so different and unique, but we all have many universal things in common, and we're all going to suffer. We're all going to struggle, and sort of being able to sort of take that as a given. That's what takes the embarrassment away. It's that this is a human thing, that we're
Yeah.
all going to. And we all kind of need each other as well. And I think that was the other thing, like being able to find a community of people who've been so receptive to these comics. It does take the fear away. I mean, there's always going to be fear. And, I mean, every time you do IFS, you don't know what's going to happen. And it's exploring and it is a little bit scary, but you keep kind of coming back to yourself with capital S, over and over again. And it's like, I'm not scared of exploring anymore. I feel like I know how to sort of be myself more. So it's a wonderful model, and it's been such a joy to be able to put them into comics form. And I've had so many restrictions because I basically make them for Instagram so people can read them on their phones. So it gives me a limitation, which is like 10 squares or 10 panels. So you can swipe
Oh.
across. And obviously I've done longer strips as well, which are on my website. I did a comic about my very first IFS session, and I've done 3 which were connected to kind of eating and anxiety around having meals. So they were longer strips, and they're meant to represent full IFS sessions, which people are free to read. But the ones that I do every week, Wednesday or Thursday, I try and put out a new strip, and 10 panels long. And and it's kind of distilling that parts work, the essence of, well, what's going on inside me when I get close to a part. And I don't know what's going to happen either, so until I do it, and you don't know what you're going to find every time. So just during that mining process for me it's just like mining in yourself. And the idea is that, it kind of demystifies IFS, because like I said, when I found the parts workbook and it's like, I want to do this, I connect to this, and, this really speaks to me. I kind of wanted something like this in comics form, but it didn't really exist, so I was kind of making it for myself because I wanted it to be in the world. Yeah.
Well, and it's another way of learning it. It's another way of like learning, just intellectually learning the model. I don't know, I guess I'm just thinking of like different ways of learning. And I think of like I could read, a textbook about
Mm.
IFS and that would be one way of learning. But then when I see and like ingest the comics, it feels like I don't know, it feels like I'm learning in a deeper or a different way. Or maybe it's like a right brain, left brain or something.
Yeah, yeah, and some people do connect very much to images, and it's like, that's how I learn things. I've had amazing, because it's on Instagram first before it goes on my website, and I get messages from people and I get comments, and reading those are really encouraging. And I've had so many messages which have been incredibly touching. One woman wrote to me and said that she's been showing my comics to her therapist, and they've been using them as like a basis to do her own explorations. And it was just like, oh my goodness. I had another guy who told me that he's studying to be a psychologist, and now he's kind of going to try and get into IFS. And you just don't know. All I'm doing is put my own stuff out in the world. Like, that's all
Wow.
I can speak for is for myself and my parts. But it's so nice to know that I'm not alone. I'm not crazy. I'm not a freak. Other people like have this going on inside them too. And it's amazing. It's kind of like when I had my baby and I needed that mom's group around me because it's so
Yes.
isolating, you know? And I think we have all this noise going on inside us. And when you get close to it and you befriend it, you kind of, it, it's manageable with parts work, you know? You don't
Yeah.
feel overwhelmed. You always have yourself to kind of to draw on and support you. I'm working with, I mean, I've worked with two wonderful therapists as well who have been amazing. And yeah, just the IFS community at large, like they've been so supportive. The Facebook group, meeting friends through there.
Well, and that brings me back to what you said earlier about being scared, and that in self, I'm not scared.
Right. Yeah. Didn't Dick say like in self there is no fear, you know?
I love that. Right, because
Yeah.
parts of course are scared because you're being so vulnerable, and then when you hear people say, "Oh, I'm bringing your comics to my therapist, and then that's helping me do my own parts work," you're like, "Whoa, like that's amazing and what an honor." But some parts might feel like that's I don't know, feels heavy.
Yeah, like responsibility. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it does, and what keeps me kind of feeling grounded with that is I'm not a teacher, you know, I am just telling a personal story. And when you kind of do that, it becomes manageable. I remember reading about her name, I can see her face, the actress who played the Queen, Helen Mirren. And it was very daunting for her to play the Queen of England in the biopic that she made. And, you know, the director said to her, all I want from you is to give a portrait, like make a portrait of the Queen. And that was her key to doing it, you know. And when I kind of remember that I'm not a teacher, but I am just put my own personal story out there, that's my key to sort of managing it. And it's like, okay, I don't need to think about the audience right now. I just need to think about what actually is going on inside me. You know, some of them connect more than others. And, you know, some posts, I've had one that, you know, got 700 likes and some that just got like 100. But it's like, it doesn't matter because they're all, you know, they all kind of like build on each other. And
Yeah.
yeah.
It's so hard, the parts that are like, why did this one get so many and this one did not? And I can go a
Yeah,
little
I
bit
try and
crazy with
step
that.
back from that. It
Yeah,
doesn't, you know, ultimately it doesn't matter. Like it's greater than the sum of the parts to put it that
exactly. I
way.
love that. So you publish 10 panel comics every week. So are those ones that you're doing, like you're working on those parts that week, or do you have like a catalog of things that
Yeah.
and then you just like, how do you do that? That every week you have something so amazing to put out there.
Well, thank you. So when I first started doing this, and I figured out my formula, I figured out that it's going to be this 10 panel thing that each individual story a person can read on their phone and swipe across. So once I figured that out. I'd been doing IFS for, I guess, a year and a half, 2 years. I've lost track. But anyway, I had like a whole folder basically full of all this scribbled down parts work and sketches. And so I had a lot to draw on from the past. And then I'm still doing this work. And so sometimes things will come up topically, like the strip I'm going to post tomorrow is about kind of the impeachment and how that's been giving me a lot of nervous, activated parts that feel very stressed out by how Donald Trump is responding and being quite vicious. And when I find myself stuck in this news cycle, and then to kind of wean myself off it, I end up wasting time online. So like shopping for clothes that I don't even buy, just putting stuff in my basket and then taking it out again. And it's like I can waste hours like that. And it's like, no, why am I feeling this way? And when I did the parts work, it's like, okay, it's because of Donald Trump. and, and it's because of like how I felt when I was a kid. Learning that the world was going to end through the Jehovah's Witness, it gave me that same feeling that the news cycle gave me. And so so sometimes things are topical, and that just happened. And I do have this part of me which I call my reporter part, and she's always saying that would make a really good strip. And I'll be doing IFS, and she'll pop up, and I'm like, would you mind just unblending? I do
Right.
hear you, but right now it's not the time. And she's like, okay, I'll file it away. That's fine. And
Great.
sometimes things are too personal and not processed yet. I feel like I can only really share things once they're in the process of being healed or healed already. So there's some
Yeah.
stuff which is, and also stuff that I'm going to put in a book one day, which isn't really to be read online, but I feel like there's an intimacy when somebody reads a book and spends like an hour with you to just looking online and, reading something in 2 minutes. So some things are kind of like bigger to be shared on the printed page. And yeah.
So does that mean we're going to get a book?
I would love to do an IFS book, but I have a graphic novel that I'm working on, which is due in a year, in September 2020. So until I finish that, I can't think about putting another book together. I'm sorry. But I'm
I'm
going to keep
not
making the
liking that.
strips. I work on my graphic novel all week, and then at the weekend I do these IFS strips. So I'm
That's
pretty disciplined, but I can't figure out another publishing schedule on top of that.
No, and I'm sure you can't wrap your head like you need to finish that. So
I
is
do.
the
Yeah.
next graphic novel isn't going to be Sky and Stereo. That's going to be it's going to be
No,
something
that's all
different, right?
finished. It's called Strange Kind of Love, and it's a graphic novel about botanists in the 1980s in England, and it kind of jumps forward to the future by 30 years, so 2015. And yeah, it's kind of like a multi-generational love story. There's lots of couples who are mismatched in age. I've had so much fun writing it,
Fun.
and yeah, I just love working on it. So it doesn't feel like work, to be
Good.
honest. I listen to a lot of your podcasts as well. I just listened to some
Aw.
with Seth Copalt. That was so great. So.
Yeah, he was great. Tell me about the discipline, because I'm curious about that, because I'm guessing you have to be pretty disciplined to produce all that you're producing.
Yes, I have a good morning routine, which is key. I think anybody who wants to get more creative in their life, they should get up a little bit earlier and just start there. And getting up earlier in the morning means that I have to go to bed earlier, so it's quite healthy as well. I've cut down my caffeine so that I can go to bed earlier and then get up earlier. So yeah, I will tend to get up early in the morning. I will do a little meditation or some yoga, and then I will try and draw a page before I do anything before I go to work. So yeah, anybody who wants to get more creative in their life, I do recommend getting up earlier in the morning. It's a wonderful way to make time for yourself before the world has kind of woken up. And then, like I said, I have a day job and I have a 10-year-old daughter. So life is pretty kind of busy. But I have like 2 days a week, basically, like Mondays and Tuesdays, my day to work on comics. And then at the weekend, I just like find time to do these IFS comics. And it's just like, even when I'm at work and on my break, I'll have my sketchbook with me. It's just something I just keep tuning into, that part of myself kind of all day. So when I have a little bit of downtime, I'll just sit at my desk and I'll draw or like write in my journal. And when you make things habits, it becomes like very easy. And there's whole books written about resistance and, like wanting to be creative, but like feeling blocked. And it's not something I struggle with. So I'm very fortunate, but then I do have good habits and I've worked to kind of cultivate them.
Yeah, I think in IFS we would call those, you have really good managers. You have really good manager parts that have created
Yeah.
habits and
I do have I call her my creative guardian, and she looks like, do you remember the Gem cartoon from the 80s? There was a character called Synergy, who's this kind of like robot hologram woman, and my creative manager looks like her. And she's always looking out for me, like she doesn't overschedule me, she
oh,
pushes like, dental appointments to a day when I'm working anyway, so it's not going to interfere with my comics drawing. So yeah, I really appreciate that part of myself, who's always proactive and carving out time and who says no to things for me. It's like, yeah, I can't do that, I'm just too busy. And
well, I
so
think that's true because if you're working on these projects, then
mhm.
you could easily get another part if you could come in and say, oh, well, this person wants to meet for coffee, or oh, I could go for a walk, or so another part could come in with these great ideas that keep you from doing your work.
Yeah, and I do plan time for that as well. I've got a pretty good planner part, scheduler who keeps a pretty good diary, and she'll make time for that too. But when it comes to my work, I'm pretty like serious and focused about it.
That's
Yeah, and
great.
like I said, it doesn't feel like work, like 'cause I'm doing something I really enjoy and love. So yeah, it's kind of also a pleasure, and I feel that when I'm kind of working on my comics, I get to experience that feeling of flow, which feels like self, and so
Yes,
it's like
yes.
really good for me as well. I'm more kind of relaxed and nicer to be around once I've had time to myself to do this work. So yeah, I see it's it's a healthy thing for everybody, really.
Yeah, you're like, I'm a nicer mom and nicer wife and
Right.
nicer friend. And yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that does sound like when you get into that space that there is this flow. And when there's flow, I mean, that's self. And then there's more creativity and more clarity. And
Yeah.
then you can produce more. You can produce more
Absolutely.
on your
Yeah.
book or on the IFS comics too.
And I do have parts of me that, want to push me as well and feel quite driven. And sometimes I can feel like that tendency just keep going until I'm kind of like a bit burned out. So it's
Yeah.
it's like balancing, and recognizing that things go in cycles as well. So when you're kind of using your creativity, you have periods where you have to kind of like fertilize the ground, so to speak. Then you have a time to
Right.
harvest. And it's sometimes you are kind of more in a collecting information, just taking it easy. It looks like you're not doing anything, but under the surface, you're kind of gathering, like wool gathering, I think you'd call it. And so, yeah, so recognizing that, and I'm in my mid 40s now, so I've been doing comics for like 20 years. And it comes, with age and experience and maybe a little bit of wisdom as well that, yeah, there is like a cycle to a book. And
Yeah, and there's a cycle to our energy, right? There's a cycle to our
definitely,
energy, and it sounds like you have parts that allow for that. That you don't have parts that come in are like, nope, I said that I was going to do 5 morning pages, right? That's the thing, right? Do five
yeah.
morning pages. I was going to do 5 morning pages, and you didn't do, so you don't. It doesn't sound like either you have had that and you've worked with it, or you don't have that.
Do you know when I push myself too much is when I start making like loads of mistakes. When I've made like 5 mistakes in a single panel, I'm like, yeah, this isn't happening right now. I need to do something else.
That's good. So that gives
So
you a cue. That's your cue of
it is.
like, okay,
Yeah.
I
You
love
kind of
that.
get to know yourself like really well doing IFS, and then you get to know yourself really well when you kind of sit at your desk and make a commitment to doing your creative project. So yeah, both ways you kind of like learn to recognize where you're at and what I need right now and what I need to do. And sometimes I
Mm.
do have to really push myself. Like I've had like tight deadlines where I've had to just draw all weekend and the house is a tip and I've just had to focus on it. But somehow I've always met my deadlines, and I think yeah, it all figures out, it all falls into place somehow.
And I think that's good too to remember that. It's like I always meet my deadlines, and so
Mm.
it all tends to work out because when you're in the middle of it, it's hard to
Yeah,
remember that
does.
sometimes.
Like right, this graphic novel I'm working on right now, it's 350 pages, and I've got like a year to do it, and I'm on page 40 finished pages all scanned, which isn't bad, but it means it's like a page a day basically. I have to. So some days if I can do like 3 pages, then I can have like 2 days off. So
And how many
you can make
panels is
little
a
bargains with
page?
yourself. It
Oh
all
yeah, that's true.
depends. Like with a graphic novel, it can be anywhere from like 6 to 9, or just one. It could be one splash panel. So
You have to draw. So in Sky and Stereo, what I noticed is that there is so much detail in every single panel. And I was like, heavens to Betsy, like the amount of lines. Like there was one page that it was like a city page, and I thought it would have taken me a year to do this one page because there's so many lines. So
yeah.
do you draw each panel, or is there a way to like get around it?
No, you have to draw each panel, and the thing is, you end up drawing it like 5 times because you'll do your rough sketches, and then you'll do like a tighter sketch, and then you'll do your penciled sketch. Then you have to ink it, and then you have to erase it. And so it's like I've drawn this thing 5 times now. With Sky and Stereo, because the second half of it is set in a psychiatric hospital, and I wanted that to feel quite oppressive and always present. So I really did a lot of background like details in there. Like I drew out the hospital ward, and I had like a map that I would work from, just to make sure that all the doors would open and close the right way and I wouldn't have
Oh my
continuity errors.
word.
Sometimes
Jeez.
you can do that and it's like, I've drawn this character left-handed again. And it's like, oh, it's so frustrating. But I just wanted every panel of the hospital to remind you that she's in a hospital and that she's kind of enclosed. And so I did a lot of the
Yeah, I felt that.
around hospital
Thanks.
beds. Yeah, it's. I'm sure it's quite an intense book to read. I mean, I can't even look at it anymore because it's like, oh, that's just 2 years ago for me now. But I'm
But
so focused on the next project. But
yeah. But so the details of that, I mean, do you feel like you just have parts that are just very patient?
hmm yeah, I've never really thought about that. I guess I do. I guess I have a lot of sort of patience and attention to detail. But then my husband is quite the same way. I mean, he's very like detail oriented. I think as cartoonists, you just are, and you don't really question that. You just let your cartoonist parts get on with it, and you don't really question their judgment too much. It's like, yeah, we got this. We got this.
Do you do that in your outside world too? Like, do you notice details of
Oh
like,
yeah.
because you probably are such a good observer, right? Because if you
I'm
have to
like
observe the,
constantly rearranging my house. I'll walk past a lamp and it's like next to a vase. And that needs a third thing. That needs to be a little triangular group of three. So yeah, I'm constantly like moving things around and
isn't there something about a rule of three? Because things like, so you don't put like two,
yeah.
like you don't put a candle and something else by itself. It has to be three.
And you got to stagger the heights as well. So you have something tall with something short and
Oh
maybe with a
my
bookshelf
word.
around it. But yeah, I go around and I just like look at the world like that and straightening pillows. And I'm working a library for my day job as well. So that's very detail oriented. Got to
So
get
is
those
there a
fine details.
time where you're just like, I don't know, ride a roller coaster or something? Is there something that kind
Yeah.
of,
No, I've got
no?
my cautious parts who don't really enjoy that
You're,
too much.
yeah,
I
you're
really
looking
like
at me like,
nature and
no.
I love nature and hiking and things like that. And I feel like nature is so chaotic. Like when you go on a hike, there's just so much to look at, but it's never overstimulating, and it's just all harmonious. And so
Mm.
for me, that's kind of like chaos and freedom and wildness. And I love gardening. So I love to get messy in my garden and just start digging and like pulling rocks around and things. So yeah, I've got that kind of wild and tame side, but comics is where it all gets harmonized and domesticated and yeah, put into order. It's where I put the world in order.
Yeah, I think that I feel more self when I'm in nature, when I'm
Yeah.
hiking or like get your hands in dirt.
I feel like your
Feels
parts
very,
just relax. It's
yeah.
trees I feel are such, I mean, I have so many trees on my street. I think I have 30 and I counted them one time. And it's just like each tree just feels so nice. And it's like, I'm so glad it's there because it's
Mhm.
shade. And I just, my
Aw,
parts relax whenever I'm around like nature. So yeah, self can just step forward more naturally.
I love that. Yeah. I love that idea, right? If the parts relax, then self can step forward.
Yeah, and I think that's wonderful. What's wonderful about IFS, talking about organizing and like putting the world into order. I feel like when I was experiencing a lot of anxiety in 2015, everything felt noisy and chaotic inside,
Mm.
and a lot of fear and scared and not knowing why. And I feel like IFS really gave me a methodology to actually organize what's going on inside. And once you've got them organized, you can start having them take care of each other, and
Mm.
it's such a wonderful model. I'm so glad I learned how to do this, and I'm really happy to be able to draw comics about it that people want to read because people should know about this. It should be in the world. I wish I'd learned it, when I was a kid, like I'm teaching my kid now. So
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that because I think that that's something that I love about the comics is when you interact with your daughter because I think it's
yeah,
sometimes I'm like I'm not sure how to talk to my son about it and my son will quickly tell me to stop being a therapist. Like I don't know
right.
where he's picked up I don't even know where he got this languaging, but he'll be like, "Don't be a therapist to me," and I'm like, "What?"
My
So
daughter
I
tells me not to be a hippie. So yes,
Oh, okay. And I'm like,
yeah.
where did you hear that? So I have to be careful, but I love you really do a great job of demonstrating how you parent with her. Like I feel like I've learned so much about parenting and IFS through your comics.
Well, wow, thank you. Um, I've used what kind of came up naturally. It was never like a decision like I'm going to do comics about parenting in IFS. I just kind of like wrote what came up naturally for me. And a lot of it is other stuff that I've been taking on board as well. Like Brené Brown's books have been like so helpful to me, like The Power of Vulnerability. And really like setting boundaries, I kind of got a lot from her as well. She's so great on that. And so, yeah, like situations would occur. I made one comic which is in a swimming pool where my daughter and I were like hanging out in the deep end. It was like very quiet and we had the deep end to ourselves. And this little girl who had a lot of confidence said to my daughter, "Come over here and play with me," in the very crowded shallow end. And my daughter didn't want to do it. And I kind of watched her like dutifully like swim to the side and go and hang out with this little girl. And she didn't want to do it. And so I kind of called her back over. And when she came back over, she said to me, thanks for rescuing me. And I had this internal struggle with myself. Like, I'm not always going to be around to rescue her. Like, she needs to learn how to say no. And through my mind, all these scenarios of when I could have really done with saying no as a teenager and couldn't do it because I felt like I had to be a nice person and nice people don't say no to people. So it just kind of came together. And I said to her, saying no is going to make you feel uncomfortable like right now, but in the long term, it means you don't have to do something you don't want to do. So it's worth doing. And that made sense to her, and we practiced it. And then she got mad at me because I made her practice it, and she kind of tipped me over in the swimming pool. But it's like an important lesson and one that I kind of keep coming back to. And yeah, I made a comic about that, which is on my Instagram page, and it's on my website as well. I think it's called "This Will Make You Uncomfortable," and yeah, it kind of helps cement things for me as well. Like when I draw something, it's like I feel like I'm learning it too. you know?
Yeah, so that's what we talk about is like after a session,
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll speak for me as a client of IFS therapy. Like after I have a session, then I will often write it out. Like I'll write out what happened. I'll write out like the story. I'll write the whole thing out right after, because then I usually go from my therapist appointment to being a therapist. So I go
Okay.
in the middle of my day, and then I go and then I'm in session with other people. So often it's sort of like I have to shift into, kind of therapist mode. And so that really helps me just process and like deepen what just happened, and then I can kind of reread it or even rewrite about it, and that writing process has helped me. I've even done, because I can't draw at all, but I draw these stick figures on my son's lunch napkin, and I
Yeah.
draw stick figures of like the fun thing that we did that day or that weekend. So like there's all these terrible stick figure napkin drawings, which I don't think he really appreciates very much, um but
If
I'm
it's not told you to stop, keep going, I say.
that's true, because he hasn't said
Yeah.
anything. And I'm like, do
Right.
you really appreciate these stick figures that I'm doing? There's a sun and there's a stick figure, and I have long hair and he has like a ball cap,
But one day when he's 30 and making lunches for his own kid, he'll remember that. So, yeah.
and he'll do stick figure drawings on his napkins.
Yeah.
But I love that because I think it does deepen the work.
It does.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like
And
reviewing it that way.
Brene Brown talks about this. She talks about, all these things that you kind of like learn. How do you kind of make it real? How do you kind of bring it into the heart? And she says that creativity is the answer. And I love that. And, people are creative in
Yeah.
so many ways. So I don't want to give the impression that, being able to draw or write is the only way to express your creativity. In some ways, like I kind of wish I could be free of it so I could just dabble and do other things like, just take photography in the park or get some clay and bash it around. But I feel I'm so focused on my comics that uses up all my kind of creative energy. So yeah, I mean, creativity can be anything. I mean, if you think about all the great minds in science, they use creativity to solve problems. It's not just in the arts; it belongs to kind of everything. It could be baking. It's
Yeah,
like kind of problem solving with this kind of deeper part of you, and in a fun way. So yeah,
I
like
love
Brené
that.
Brown said, you bring it into the heart, you make it real using creativity. And that's been true for me. And yeah, you're
Hmm.
finding it too. You write it down, it kind of makes it realer, you know.
Yeah. So I want like the listeners to hear that, even if they aren't this amazing comic drawer or they write or do napkin stick figures, that they have their own creative way, and that they to have freedom to use whatever creativity they have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Check the hobbies section. There's like so much, and I look at all
Ah,
these craft kits and it's like, yeah, I'd love to embroider, but I don't have time for that. I've got friends who knit and make these beautiful things, but they don't define themselves as artists, and it
but they
doesn't
are
matter. They
right.
are. Yeah, we kind of all
Yeah.
are. We all have this artist part of ourselves.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think right, so that we all have this artist part. Like I think that I'm having parts of me that are like, but do I? Because I think I go into these like craft stores and I get completely overwhelmed. And I don't know. I think there's a part of me that's like, if someone laid that out for me, then I could do that. If someone laid out, you know, whatever, I don't even know what it would be. But if they
Right.
like laid it out, then like, yeah, I could make a thing. But I would have. So I think there's a part there for me that sort of feels like, can I be creative, or what does that look like for
Right.
me? If it doesn't look like art, then what
Right.
could it be?
And I
So
think
what?
people do have parts that kind of like struggle with that. We think of art as being like a finished product, and that's really not the case at all. Art is actually like a process, and it's the kind of having fun and the engaging and that time spent with flow. In a way, it doesn't matter kind of what you create, what you end up with. I've got lots of failed like pottery attempts, and I've got sewing attempts. I do try and sew all the time, and I can do stuff for the Barbie doll house. I can make quilts and pillows, but when I try and make anything bigger than that, it's terrible. I can do Halloween costumes that will fall apart in a week. So,
Oh, what's
but
your daughter
yeah,
going to be for Halloween?
she's going to be a gelfling from the Dark Crystal because they have that new Netflix series. This is kind of speaking to all my young parts because I loved the Dark Crystal when I was a kid. And so the fact that my daughter's so into it now and wants to be Brea from the Dark Crystal, I'm all in. It's looking pretty good. I made the ears. She's got like the wig and the gelfling wings because the girls can fly. That's a very key point.
I
So,
like
yeah.
it.
What about your
Hmm.
son? What's he going to be?
Sadly, he's going to be a Halo guy. My
Okay.
son loves
That's from the video
tons.
game,
And
right? Yeah.
yeah, he doesn't even watch it, but he knows what it is from like, I don't even know how I don't know how he knows these things, like
It's
advertisements or
funny when
something.
you go to like trunk or treat, you'll see kids dressed as like Freddy Krueger and stuff, and that's like a horror film from the 80s. I'm pretty sure you haven't seen that, but
Right,
they
but
do the
they know who
costumes
these
a
people
bit size
are.
anyway.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
I like the trunk or treat that the schools do now because that's all, it's kind of enclosed and it's all the families and all the kids from school, they can do it together. So
yeah.
that's kind of a bigger deal for us than actual trick or treat.
Well, and then I think about creativity, right? Because
Mhm.
people then it's almost like they have parts that maybe relax a little bit so they can be more creative. So like, okay, just my mom, who I think would say that she's not creative, did this amazing Frozen like scene from the movie
Mhm.
Frozen in her trunk for my nieces. They did like a trunk or treat thing, and she did this crazy, amazing Frozen thing. And I was like, I think that that really allowed for her creative parts to come out that
Right.
she
And I
doesn't think
bet
she
she really
has.
enjoyed making that as well. It's kind of evident. And
Yeah.
again, it's that the whole process thing. Like, I wouldn't make these books if finishing a book, and having a finished book was the ultimate goal. Because, like I said, it took me 3 years to do one book, and it maybe takes someone like an hour to read it. So it's not very good. It's not a very good time investment from that point of view. But it's about the connection that people feel. I mean, that's one aspect of it. And the other aspect is like, I really love doing this. This is how I enjoy spending my days. I have a podcast on, I've got my bottle of ink and my pens, and it's fun for me. So it's about that creative process. And, I find gardening is creative as well, but it's not the same because I feel like some of the energy is doing all the growing. I'm just providing the right conditions. But again, it's the process.
Mm.
And I feel like art should really be process driven. I would, if I could like retrain and do a different career, I think I'd like to do some kind of like art therapy and just get messy with like paint and sand and all this kind of stuff.
Well, I think that a couple of things happen. It sounds like parts relax so that self can come forward, and then in self there can be more creativity and there can be that feeling of flow, which happens I think when I hike, right? Because when you're
Mm-hmm.
hiking and you're in that, you get that flow feeling, or people talk about that with sports, they get into this flow. And
Right.
so I
Yeah.
think if people are having a hard time, if they've listened to this and they're like, I'm not as creative as I want to be, or I'm not finding time, or there's something, this creativity is not happening for me in my life, I think that I would just ask them to maybe check out the parts that have some opinions about creativity or making time for it or their own abilities, and just see what those parts have to say, and see if they can build a relationship with those parts that are keeping them from being more creative and having more self energy to be
Mm-hmm.
creative.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think when people do, so for example, they suffer from writer's block, and this is something I'm really interested in. I had a lot of, like I said, writer's block has never really been a problem for me, but I have had, big anxiety about sharing my work, and it's like, how can I possibly put that out into the world? It's far too personal, far too revealing. Kind of issues like that have been a problem for me, and I really had to do parts work around that. And I think that IFS can actually help you get in touch with your creativity. And I have found that since I've been doing these IFS comics, something has kind of like opened up in me, and I'm just so much more productive now. Just I feel like a lot of things have fallen into place, and I'm more disciplined. I'm just more focused, and my creative, with a big C, that creativity is really, I mean, that's the quality of self that I can kind of get in touch with the easiest. And it's, IFS has really amplified that for me. And with it, along with that, when you're in the creative process and you have a kind of like higher part of your mind that can kind of open up. And I feel like when I was writing this graphic novel, for example, my new one, there was stuff in there that I'm like, I have no idea where that came from. And I love it. And I love this story, but I don't feel like I kind of can take credit for this because I just kind of opened up a little bit and this came to me. And who am I to take credit for this? I don't know where it came from. And so I do feel like you can kind of get in touch with kind of like intuition and it's like
Yeah.
kind of like higher states of being through creativity. And it's kind of you and it's not you. You're just kind of a channel for it. I love Elizabeth Gilbert, and she wrote a book called Big Magic, where she talks about, our ideas about creativity and genius. And she talks about opening up to this kind of like energetic current, which is, the world of art or music or whatever it is. And you basically kind of like tap into it by being like an open conduit. And she says that it doesn't mean you sit around and wait for the muse to come and kiss your brow. It means that you develop really, really good work habits. So when the muse does come and see you hard at work, she's like, I'm gonna go with that one, because this story that I want to give to the world, she'll be a good channel for it. It's a kind of, in some ways, it's a bonkers way to think about creativity, but it's so creative, right? And there's so much truth to it. I've had ideas and I'm like, yeah, I don't feel like that came from me. That came from somewhere in the cosmos. And thank you. Like, I'm
Yeah,
going to use it and do my best to sort of put it as a story into the world. But yeah, I feel like something else is kind of in the room with you when you really lose yourself in the flow, and it's kind of amazing. It's like working with creative guides or something.
Yeah. I love that.
Doesn't always happen. It is 99% perspiration and just having this. But that 1% of inspiration when it comes is divine. So.
And it probably comes at the right time, right? You're like, it comes at the right time. Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thank you, Tammy. Yeah.
Tell everyone where to follow you on Instagram and your website.
Okay, well, if you go to my website, it's got all the links to the social media places you can follow me. My website is www.ifscomics.com. And that's at Miss Mardou, MS Mardou on Instagram. But like I said, if you go to ifscomics.com, you can follow me on social media from there. And you can find my books on there as well. So it's like one-stop portal for all my IFS comics and other stuff.
Great. And I highly recommend those comics. They're fantastic. Sky in Stereo Volume 1 and Sky in Stereo Volume 2. They're fantastic.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah. And one last thing I should say is that the other thing I had some nervousness about was, I'm not a therapist. Like, who am I to put these IFS comics in the world? And I felt really anxious about that, like, well, I don't want people to think that I'm trying to muscle in. And then like Dick Schwartz found my comics online and actually approached me, and we kind of like had a Zoom chat together. So it felt like, I think I'm allowed to do these IFS comics now that I've met Dick Schwartz. So it was wonderful, and a wonderful like way of just giving me permission in a way.
Yeah, you got a stamp of approval with Dick.
It felt like that. I was very grateful to him. Yeah.
You did a comic about your conversation with Dick, which was awesome.
Yeah, I was making a comics diary for a magazine called the Comics Journal, which is online. So it's very much a comics thing, not an IFS thing. But the week I was recording everything for this comics diary was the week I got to meet Dick Schwartz. I'm like, hey, perfect. That's something to put in on a Monday. So,
yeah, I thought that was great.
Thank you.
And I love how, your comics are serious, but yet they're so funny. There's so much humor in them.
Well, they are comics, they
that's true.
pages, so you have to kind of get that in there as well. You can't take things too seriously in a comic.
Because they're actually called comics, yeah.
They're actually called comics. I mean, you can make comics about anything. There's been comics about the Holocaust, and yet at the same time, it's still about people, and people are still human and funny. And so, there's like dark humor in the darkest of books, so yeah. Comics are an incredible medium. They give you the visual and the writing. You have to do two things. Your brain works in two ways. You're reading a story and you're also visually reading a story. And the two things can do different things. And so I'm interested in that play of pictures and words and where they take your mind, and they can just immerse you in something that, you're not expecting to be immersed in. So
I think that's what happened, as you're saying, like, yes, that's exactly what happened to me when I read your books, because I was like, I'm just going to like read these books because I'm meeting with her tomorrow, or not tomorrow, but like, this was last week. So I'm going to be with her. And, but it was like immediately I was having this experience, and I love to read. I read all the time. And I was having a different experience.
Yeah.
So I think that just explained it to me. I was like, because I think I even told you, I literally had to move the book away from me, because I was like, so in the first volume, you talk about working in this pizza shop, and my first job, or I think it was like a fast food restaurant.
The burger bar, yeah.
Yeah, and my first job was at this pizza place, and I was starting to like remember the smells and just have this like sick to my stomach feeling, as you were talking about, like, and I was like, what is happening? I literally had to like move it away from me, because I was like, it was almost too intense. And her in the hospital, it was same thing, because I worked in a psych hospital, was very traumatizing. And I literally was like, I don't know that I could keep reading this. But
wow. Well, I'm glad you did. Thank you.
I did. I'm glad I did too.
As well, and Yeah. So, well, with your permission, I'm going to send you a list of like further reading. Like, I think you should read more graphic novels now. And there's some wonderful
I
ones out there.
I would love that. And I'm
Okay.
like, and I
All right.
love to read, so I'm really open to that. Well, thank you so much. It was so nice to see you, and I love what you're
Thank you.
doing, and I can't wait to every week to see those comics. They're fantastic.
I appreciate it so much. And thank you for this podcast. I really love listening to it and I've learned so much.
Thanks for hanging out today. If you liked this episode, make sure you subscribe. And if you really like this episode, share it with a friend and leave a review. You can follow me on Instagram at IFS Tammy and join our community on Facebook at the One Inside Podcast. Talk to you next time.